Since everyone is coming to a talk about conspiracy theories, I don't think I have to tell you why this is an interesting and important topic to study. So I thought I'm going to start my dissertation talk with something that most of you don't know, which is how I got here. My interest in conspiracy theories started 3 years ago with a long train ride from my home in Brooklyn to Manhattan. While I was scrolling through my New York Times app, I came across this article. Families of victims of the Sandy Hook shooting were suing Alex Jones for spreading conspiracy theories that the shooting was staged. And I had no idea who Alex Jones was at the time. And when I looked him up and learned about his web of conspiracy theories, my mind just entirely exploded. And I wasn't just bewildered by the absurdity of all these conspiracy theories, but also about the awful suffering that they were causing. Many family members of the Sandy Hook victims are still getting harassed by people who believe that they are part of a false flag operation. It's incredibly horrific. Some families received death threats, and some of them are still living in hiding for security reasons. So I became immediately obsessed with this topic, and I wanted to understand what's going on in these people's mind, and also how to prevent the spread of and the suffering that comes from these conspiracy theories. So I became so obsessed that I wanted to pivot from my research on sense of agency and control and start studying conspiracy theories. I didn't really have a great case to make here. Research on conspiracy theories at that time was a little bit more of a fringe and weird topic in psychology, and I only had a little less than 3 years left until graduation. But I was extremely fortunate. And I had two incredible mentors who allowed me to go on that journey nevertheless. Yakov, who supported me pivoting from our work on agency and control, and then Jay, who welcomed me as a new student to his lab, who wanted to study a topic that was a little weird. So with this background story, I feel extraordinarily excited and very honored to present what came of all of this. My dissertation is comprised of 3 papers to examine how conspiracy theories emerge, spread, and manifest in society. In the first paper of my dissertation, my colleagues and I developed a theoretical framework of conspiracy theories, essentially organizing the different psychological pathways to conspiracy theories. And then in paper 2 and 3, we apply this framework and look at randomness perception and social identity as pathways to conspiracy theories, respectively. First off, what are conspiracy theories? A conspiracy theory is a theory that contends that a group is working in secret for their own benefit against the common good and in a way that undermines bedrock ground rules against the widespread use of force and fraud. It's a very long definition, but I really like it because it captures the nuance of conspiracy theories, including the idea that conspiracy theories are actually not necessarily wrong or irrational. There's an abundance of conspiracy theories that turned out to be true. So just a few months ago, the opioid manufacturer Purdue Pharma pleaded guilty to conspiracies to defraud the United States. So people often associate believing in conspiracy theories with being kind of like crazy and irrational, and that's really not the case. Okay, so let's go to my dissertation work. The development of the theoretical framework that guided my dissertation was prompted by the question of the psychology behind anti-democratic behavior in social movements. Past research has linked conspiracy theory beliefs to engaging in behaviors like political violence and discrimination. And my collaborators and I argue that in order to understand conspiracy theory beliefs and their behavioral manifestations, we do have to understand the motives that draw people to conspiracy theories, how these motives interact with each other, and also their unique relationships with conspiracy theories. Douglas, Sutton, and Kikochka have distilled 3 main motives behind conspiracy theories: the social, epistemic, and existential motive. And we developed a framework that allows us to better understand how these motives are related to conspiracy theories, particularly those conspiracy theories that fall a little bit more on the spectrum of being very implausible or irrational, if you want to say. So this framework allows us to better capture the complexity of conspiracy theory beliefs and also make new predictions. Our framework makes 2 main propositions. First, we argue that in order to understand the psychological pathways to conspiracy theories, we have to understand the architecture. We propose that conspiracy theories comprise at least two components, qualities and content. Qualities refer to the structural properties that all conspiracy theories have in common, and content refers to the unique narrative elements of each conspiracy theory. In the second proposition, we argue that these components have different psychological pathways. More specifically, we argue that these two components appeal to people differently based on their active motivational states. The first propositions led to this framework. It's a lot to take in, so I'm just going to go over the main aspects using these examples of the epistemic and social identity motives, and then also the implications for the second proposition. So let's focus on the first proposition. On the top here of our framework, we have qualities. Again, qualities refer to the structural properties that all conspiracy theories have in common. For example, conspiracy theories are usually unpopular and counter-normative, particularly the implausible and irrational ones. Of course, there's also variation in how popular and non-normative are, so we have to keep that in mind too. And then another quality of conspiracy theories is that they imbue events, even random ones, with meaning and structure. So for instance, they are quick to provide simple explanations for complex events like a mysterious plane crash or the emergence of a pandemic. They also provide structure and patterns, even in entirely random events. So one fitting example is the infamous Pizzagate conspiracy theory. So emerged by people looking through emails of Hillary Clinton's campaign chair and identified allegedly suspicious patterns and code words for human trafficking. They assigned words such as cheese pizza to mean little girl and ice cream to mean male prostitutes to support their ideas. In other words, Pizzagate established illusory patterns between random events, random words in that case, and found deeper meaning within innocuous emails. On the bottom of the framework, we have the content component. Let's quickly go back to our definition. So it appears that although conspiracy theories all share the same premise, individual conspiracy theories can still very much vary in the specifics. So for instance, where does the conspiracy theory take place? Is the conspiracy about an event in the US, in Taiwan, in Kenya, and so on? Or who is involved in the conspiracy? Some conspiracy theories are about religious groups, some are about political parties, etc., etc. So let's look at the psychological pathways. We argue that the different components of conspiracy theories have different appeals and are correspondingly linked to different psychological pathways. In order to illustrate how these components respond to different motives, we use a movie metaphor. Some people choose a movie because of their content and some because of its qualities. So for instance, imagine someone who had just like a really hard day at work and might just really need a good laugh. When they log into Netflix, they likely jump directly to a comedy genre because its defining qualities, being funny, lighthearted, etc., would perfectly match that desire. The specific content of the movie, like who is starring in it, where does the plot take place, etc., might actually be inconsequential. Conversely, someone might be a big fan of an actress like Julia Roberts and will pick a movie that stars Julia Roberts regardless of the movie's genre. They choose a movie because of their content, who is starring in it. So when we think about conspiracy theories as a genre of belief systems, where each conspiracy theory is a unique narrative, we can make certain predictions. For instance, just like someone who really wants a good laugh and is open to watch any sort of movie as long as it's a comedy, someone with a high desire to understand the world and certain events, for example, like a mysterious plane crash, might be drawn to conspiracy theories because of its quality to provide structure and explanations of even inexplicable events. The specifics of this theory, like who is the conspiring group, might actually be secondary. What counts is that the conspiracy theory provides structure and meaning. Social identity modus, on the other hand, might draw people foremost to the content of a conspiracy theory. So just like someone who's down to watch just any movie that stars Julia Roberts, regardless of whether it's a comedy, a drama, a thriller, someone who might highly identify with a particular social group might be drawn to any sort of narratives that make their in-group look good and discredit their out-group. For example, we saw that during the 2020 US presidential elections, where people who are highly identified with the Republican Party and Trump were very quick in believing that the election was stolen. And of course, this framework is theoretical and simplifying. In reality, it probably looks more like this. So none of the constructs, of course, operate in isolation, and people have multiple motives at the same time. I also want to note that our paper focused on motivational pathways. However, we believe that our framework can help organize the complexity of psychological pathways to conspiracy theories more broadly. Okay, so what can we take away from this paper? I think one big takeaway is that conspiracy theories comprise at least two components, content and qualities, that appeal to people differently based on their motivations. Using these distinctions clarifies the relationship between different motives and conspiracy theory beliefs. And then also not all conspiracy theories are created equal, meaning that they vary in their manifestations of these components. So in our second paper, we look at the psychological pathways that should be linked to certain qualities of conspiracy theories, more specifically randomness perception. As I already mentioned, one quality of conspiracy theories is that they find meaning and pattern in any event, even random ones. They're connecting the dots, even the random dots, so to speak. Like Pizzagate connected ice cream to male prostitute, for example. So researchers have been arguing that people who are quick to dismiss randomness as a possible cause of an event should then also be more prone to conspiracist ideation. Conspiracist ideation in a sense of a general predisposition to interpret events as the product of a conspiracy. But the findings in the literature are actually pretty mixed. So several studies did not find any evidence for a relationship between randomness perception and conspiracist ideation. And other studies, however, found very robust positive relationships between the two constructs. So in our paper, we wanted to clarify this relationship by conducting a replication of a very influential study on that topic, as well as a meta-analysis of existing research. In addition, we extended our direct replication to investigate 3 potential explanations for the inconsistent findings in the literature. First, differences in statistical power. So what we noticed is that a lot of studies that did not find a relationship between randomness perception and conspiracist ideation had fairly small sample sizes, and studies that found relationships tended to have larger samples. Second, results might diverge because of differences in the social context. So most studies that obtained null results recruited samples from the French-speaking part of Switzerland predominantly, and studies that found significant relationships were primarily conducted in the US. Last, divergent study results might stem from differences in sample characteristics, such as education level. Most studies that obtained null effects recruited college students, while most studies that found positive relationships used more diverse samples. Okay, so first we conducted a cross-cultural replication and extended it. For the direct replication, we recruited participants in the French-speaking part of Switzerland, just like the original authors did. And then we extended the studies in 3 ways. So first, we administered the same survey in the US to explore cultural differences. Second, in each country, we recruited samples that were roughly stratified over education. And then third, we increased the sample size of the original study so that our study was sensitive to detect even small correlations and interaction effects. Okay, so our study directly followed the original study's protocol. So participants first evaluated the randomness of 40 letter strings. Afterwards, they responded to a series of scales to capture conspiracist ideation. One of them was that participants reported their belief in 4 classical or well-known conspiracy theories, like the idea that 9/11 was orchestrated by the Bush administration. They also responded to the generic conspiracist belief scale, which is a measure that taps more into a general predisposition to conspiratorial thinking without alluding to specific conspiracy theories. And then participants also read two ambiguous scenarios about a work situation and a political event respectively. And they then indicated how much they agreed with a conspiratorial interpretation of these scenarios. There were some psychometric issues with these two measures, so all of the results related to them should be treated a little bit with caution. For our extension, we asked participants about their highest educational attainment, and we also added a measure of belief in conspiracy theories related to COVID-19, like the idea that the pandemic is a hoax, just given the urgency of understanding what is going on there. Okay, so in the total sample, we observed that randomness perception here on the x-axis was associated with 3 out of the 5 conspiracist ideation measures: belief in classic conspiracy theories, generic conspiracist beliefs, and belief in COVID-19 conspiracy theories. No relationship occurred for the scenario measures. And even though some correlations were significant, they tended to be very small. Education did not moderate these findings. Culture, on the other hand, did appear as a moderator, but in the opposite direction of what we would expect from past findings. In our Swiss sample, here in red, we found that there was a positive relationship between randomness perception and belief in classic conspiracy theories, generic conspiracist beliefs, and belief in COVID-19 conspiracy theories. But there was no relationship for the scenario measures. In the US, none of these relationships were significant. So remember that most studies that found a relationship between randomness perception and conspiracist ideation were conducted in the US, while most studies that reported no findings were conducted in Switzerland. So we found the opposite. For our meta-analysis, we located 10 papers comprising a total of 18 studies and 52 effect sizes, including our own. And here's a forest plot that displays the individual effect sizes. And what's the most important number here is the meta-analytical effect size that translated into a correlation coefficient of 0.15. Okay, so what did we learn? First, randomness perception appears to be a weak and very context-sensitive pathway to conspiracy theory. So in other words, it's very noisy. And second, although we found evidence that culture influences the relationship between randomness perception and conspiracist ideation, it wasn't the opposite of what we would have expected. So cultural differences couldn't fully reconcile the contradicting evidence in the current literature. In the third paper, we looked at the second component of our framework, content, and its psychological pathways. More specifically, we examined how national narcissism may draw people to conspiracy theories related to the COVID-19 pandemic. National narcissism is an example of collective narcissism, which is defined as an inflated belief in the greatness of one's group, in this case, one's nation, that requires external validation. People who score high in national narcissism have this exaggerated idea of how great their nation is, but they also have a desire to be recognized, to have this grandiosity of their nations being validated by others. So people who score high in national narcissism tend to be overly concerned with their nation's image and are hypersensitive to criticism of their nation and national image threat. And it turns out that when the idealistic national image is under threat, people who score high in national narcissism often employ maladaptive strategies to manage this identity threat, including the adoption of conspiracy theories. So in our paper, we argued that the COVID-19 pandemic constitutes such an image threat, and that conspiracy theories related to COVID-19 are an excellent strategy, even though maladaptive, to defend an idealistic image of this impeccable and inconvincible nation that national narcissists care so much about. So we therefore hypothesized that national narcissism was positively associated with the belief in COVID-19 conspiracy theories, that people who score high in national narcissism should also be more ready to disseminate conspiracy theories related to COVID-19. And then last, of course, we were interested in what are the implications of that. So we did hypothesize that belief in COVID-19 conspiracy theories should be associated with less engagement in health behaviors and less support for public health policies that mitigate the spread of the virus. So we conducted 3 studies. One was conducted in the US, one in the UK, and then the third one constituted secondary analysis of a data set that comprised data from over 50,000 participants located in 56 countries. And I highlighted the countries from which we had data in blue here. Okay, so national narcissism constituted our conceptual predictor and was measured with previously validated scales. For our outcome variable, we presented participants a series of conspiracy theories that were related to COVID-19. And they then indicated how much they agreed with each statement. And then in study 1 and 2, they also indicated how likely they were to share each of these statements online. In studies 2 and 3, we also measured participant support for public health policies that mitigate the spread of the virus. And in study 3, participants also reported their engagement in increased physical hygiene and physical distancing during the pandemic. So what did we find? For the belief in COVID-19 conspiracy theories, we found that across all 3 studies, there were moderate and strong positive relationships between national narcissism, that is here on the x-axis, and belief in COVID-19 conspiracy theories here on the y-axis. In the graph for study 3 here, what I did is I plotted the relationship between national narcissism and belief in COVID-19 conspiracy theories for each individual country. And really notice how strikingly consistent this effect is across nations. We found a reverse relationship only for 3 out of the 56 countries. We also found, as predicted, that national narcissism was related to greater intentions to disseminate conspiracy theories related to COVID-19, which was mediated by stronger beliefs in these ideas. Very importantly, the relationship was incredibly robust, and I unfortunately don't have time to go over each confound that we addressed, but I want to highlight a couple things. So first, the relationship between national narcissism and belief in COVID-19 conspiracy theories persisted when we adjusted for participants' belief in conspiracy theories unrelated to COVID-19 in study 1. Conversely, national narcissism was not related to belief in other conspiracy theories when we adjusted for participants' belief in COVID-19 conspiracy theories. So together, that kind of suggests that national narcissism draws people to not just to simply any conspiracy theories, but more to conspiracy theories that directly correspond to the social identity threat. So this is, of course, everything preliminary, but I think it can be taken as preliminary evidence for our framework on the relationship between social identity and the content of conspiracy theories. Second, it wasn't just narcissistic tendencies in general or more constructive national identification that drove the relationship. It really was essentially the narcissistic identification with one social group that was critical here for our findings. Let's look at the last 3 outcome measures. So we found that greater belief in COVID-19 conspiracy theories, now on the x-axis, was linked to less support for public health policies and less self-reported engagement in increased physical hygiene and physical distancing. And again, notice the striking consistency of these relationships across countries. Only a few countries deviated from the general trend. So in summary, we found support for all of our hypotheses. And what we can take away from this dissertation work is that first, conspiracy theories are same but different, meaning that they vary in their fundamental dimensions and entice people differently depending on their active motivational states. We found that people's tendency to see patterns and randomness is associated with conspiracist ideation. However, this relationship appears to be weak and very, very context sensitive, particularly when we compare it to the social identity pathway that we looked at in paper 3. Social identity turned out to be a very strong and robust pathway to conspiracy theories, particularly those conspiracy theories that contained content that directly responded to social identity needs. And to end on a positive note, 3 months ago, there was a ruling in the case that sparked my interest in conspiracy theories. And against all odds, the families of the victims of the Sandy Hook shooting won their case.